The sun hung low in the sky, painting the horizon with streaks of crimson and gold. It was the kind of evening that promised peace, the kind where a gentle breeze sang through the fields, rustling the wheat like waves on a calm sea. But peace can be an illusion, and on that fateful day, the shadows loomed heavier than usual. Farmer Jack had worked the land for decades, tilling, sowing, and reaping under the vast, open skies. His barn stood proudly at the edge of his property, a testament to his labor and dedication. Inside, tools awaited their next purpose, and the scent of hay lingered, reminiscent of countless seasons gone by. Jack was a man of simplicity. He believed in hard work, honesty, and a strong sense of community. Little did he know, trouble was creeping closer, lurking just beyond his well-tended fields. As dusk approached, 3 figures emerged on the dirt road leading to his homestead. Their silhouettes cut sharp against the fading light, each step heavy with intent. They whispered among themselves, voices tinged with a mix of excitement and malice. Looters. They saw in Jack's farm not just land, but a treasure trove. With wallets and pockets full of stolen items, they approached, fueled by greed. Their eyes flicked across his grounds, scanning for weakness, for anything that could be quickly taken. In their minds, they had laid the perfect plan. They thought they'd waltz in, take what they wanted, and vanish like shadows at dawn. But Jack wasn't just any farmer. He had faced storms and drought, dealt with loss and heartbreak, all while standing tall on this sacred land. As he sat on his porch, sipping tea and enjoying the sounds of nature, a shiver ran down his spine. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Instinct kicked in. Something wasn't right. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that danced eerily across the ground. Jack rose and stepped off his porch, scanning the horizon. It wasn't long before he spotted the approaching trouble. Confident bandits striding forward, filled with arrogance and misplaced courage. They were oblivious to the fierce spirit of the man whose land they threatened. Jack felt heat rise in his chest, not fear, but a surge of determination. He had fought hard for every inch of this farm, and he would not let it go without a fight. As he reached deep into his pocket, his fingers wrapped around a small metal object, an old whistle. Years ago, it had been a token from his father, a reminder of their bond, of the many evenings spent gathering the animals with just a blow of its piercing sound. A tiny smile crept upon Jack's lips. It was a simple tool, but it packed a punch. With a firm grip, he lifted the whistle to his lips and blew. The sound pierced the calm of the evening like a battle cry. The thieves stopped in their tracks, turning their heads sharply. Panic flared in their eyes. They hadn't expected this. Jack had lived among the whispers of his livestock, taught them to heed his call. He had a strategy, and he was about to put it into action. From the far side of the barn, a cacophony erupted. The sheep, the goats, the dogs all answered the whistle's command. They thundered toward Jack, a united front of fur and hoof, their shouts mingling with the sound of stampeding chaos. The looters exchanged hurried glances, their bravado faltering. This was not the simple take they envisioned. There was no easy pocketing of goods. As the first sheep rounded the corner, the bandits stumbled back, shock painted across their faces. Jack, standing like a guardian of the land, felt a rush of pride. He had sparked the spirit of the farm, and it was answering back. But his challenge was far from over. The thieves recovered quickly, glancing at each other with newfound determination. Fear transformed into rage. They were more than looters now. They were cornered animals looking to fight. Gripping makeshift weapons, they charged toward Jack with cursing words wrapped in aggression. Jack stood firm, the thundering of the animals behind him a roar of encouragement. The odds were against him, but he had learned long ago that bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's the unwavering choice to stand despite it. His voice thundered over the sounds of chaos. With a swift motion, he threw a pitchfork into the ground, the point embedding itself with finality. He leaned forward, steeling himself for what was to come. The first looter lunged, swinging a bat. Jack dodged, sidestepping with an agility that belied his age. He reached down, grabbing a handful of dirt and throwing it right into the looter's face. A moment of confusion was all he needed. Jack sprang into action, driving forward like a bull. He tackled the bandit, throwing him off balance. The other two hesitated, unsure of their next move. And in that instant, chaos erupted. The flock of sheep, sensing danger, charged forward, bleating wildly as the mayhem unfolded. Jack's dogs, alerted by their master's whistle and the commotion of their herd, joined the fray, barking ferociously. It was a symphony of loyalty and instinct, a show of raw power against the audacity of the intruders. The second thief, eyeing the chaos and the looming, angry sheep, faltered, just as Jack had hoped. In the blink of an eye, he found himself surrounded, lost among the flurry of frantic animals and furious dogs. Yelling and cursing, he stumbled back, the shock and fear dawning upon him. The third made a wild dash for escape, barreling past the mayhem. Jack could see him clear as day, adrenaline fueling his movements. "Not on my watch," he growled. With calculated speed, he lunged, a final effort spurred by years of protecting what he loved. His hand reached out and caught the looter by the collar, yanking him backward. This moment felt suspended in time, as if the world had paused to witness an age-old struggle of man versus the darkness that threatened to consume his home. The loot was never about the items. It was about respect, survival, the very essence of a life built on hard work and dedication. As the last thug fell under Jack's determined grip, the world around them exploded with sounds: the crackling of leaves, the shrill cries of frightened animals, the rustling of grass beneath heavy boots. But amidst the chaos, a bond of trust formed between Jack and his animal companions. They had responded not just to a call, but to the spirit of their protector answering the challenge. The animals complied, retreating slightly, their eyes still fixed firmly on their master. The looters, still tangled in the mess of their own making, were at a crossroads. Panic flashed in their eyes. If they had thought Jack would simply let them go, they were gravely mistaken. The fire inside him burned bright, a shield of righteousness behind which they found no sanctuary. He stood tall, a mountain of resolve, as he looked down on the thieves. "You've chosen the wrong man, boys," Jack said, his voice calm yet steady, like a judge about to pass sentence. There was a moment of hesitation, the weight of Jack's words sinking in. The darkness in their hearts quivered under the fierce light of his conviction. In that heartbeat, they understood they were no longer merely thieves. They were opponents in a battle of wills, and Jack was winning. With their bravado crumbling, they turned to flee. No longer partners in crime, they became shadows, fleeing into the darkening night. Jack let them go. Sometimes, the greatest victory is letting the storm pass without losing what you hold dear. As the adrenaline began to fade, fatigue began to settle in Jack's bones. He looked around at his animals, still gathered and waiting, their eyes wide with trust. A wave of gratitude washed over him, the warmth of companionship and the loyalty of his herd. They had protected each other, standing strong against the dark. As the sun surrendered to night, Farmer Jack stood atop his porch, his heart full. The world outside was still, returning to an eerie calm. He had faced trouble, and in a moment where everything could have crumbled, he found strength in unity. Tomorrow the sun would rise again, and the fields would whisper secrets to the wind. But that night, under a blanket of stars, Jack knew one thing above all else. No matter what came for trouble, he would always be ready to greet it with courage and a fierce heart. The moon hung high in the midnight sky, casting a silver glow across the sprawling fields of Green Valley. It was peaceful, almost serene, but beneath that calm surface lingered an undercurrent of danger. Farmers were known for tending crops and animals, but they were also fierce protectors of their land. In this quiet valley, the air was thick with tension, and tonight, trouble was stalking its way down the dirt road. A rickety old truck rolled to a stop at the edge of Farmer Ben's property. Inside, 3 men hunched over, their faces set in grim determination. They were strangers to the valley, but they carried intentions darker than the night surrounding them. Looters. They believed they were here for an easy score, ignorant of the storm brewing within the heart of the land they were about to invade. Farmer Ben was a man of the earth, with calloused hands and a heart full of grit. He had worked this land for over 20 years, sweating through droughts and storms, nurturing crops from young seeds into vibrant harvests. The barn stood tall and fortified, a fortress lined with tools, memories, and the spirit of countless seasons. But tonight, Ben felt something unusual in the air. He was just about to close up when he heard it, the low growl of an engine, the crunch of tires on gravel. A shadow moved at the edge of his property. His instincts kicked in like clockwork. Farmers often have a sixth sense about danger. They can tell when something is amiss, even when the signs are subtle. In seconds, Ben stepped outside, his breath visible in the cold night. He took a moment to absorb the scene, the barn illuminated by the soft glow of a solitary lantern. The trees rustled gently, standing as sentinels in the dark. It was quiet, but not for long. The truck's doors swung open, and the looters spilled out, a trio of figures draped in hooded sweatshirts, faces obscured by darkness. They strode toward the barn with casual confidence, believing they were about to snatch easy riches. They whispered to each other, sharing plans and strategies only they could hear. Ben's heart raced as he watched. They were more than just common thieves. They were intruders aiming to claim what he had built. He needed to act fast. A plan raced through his mind, simmering with the intensity of fully ripe crops ready for harvest. He retreated inside his barn, moving swiftly to his tool shed. Each item held meaning, a memory attached to years of hard work. His fingers brushed against the cold metal of a few tools, but one item gripped him like a lifeline, a handful of firecrackers left over from last summer's 4th of July celebration. They were meant for fun, laughter, and light, but now they might just serve a different purpose. With a fierce determination, he devised a plan that played to his strengths. He lit a firecracker, holding it tightly, its fuse crackling as it sizzled. He stepped silently back outside, heart pounding as the looters drew closer to his barn. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Suddenly, he tossed the firecracker right onto the ground in front of them. It exploded with a loud pop, the sound echoing like thunder as light flashed before their eyes. Startled, the thieves froze, instinctively covering their ears and glancing around in confusion. This was just the opening act, the distraction he needed. Ben had always believed in the element of surprise, and he was about to deliver more than they could handle. As the smoke cleared, the fear in their eyes shifted to anger. They had come expecting a vulnerable target, but a new energy was now palpable. Ben's heart raced as he prepared for the next move. He shouted out, "This is my home." The looters exchanged uneasy glances and charged forward, but they underestimated the might that resided in Farmer Ben. He gripped the pitchfork, his faithful companion. It had seen him through long days and harder nights, the sweat of his brow a testament to their partnership. When the first thug lunged at him, all bravado and bluster, Ben sidestepped, narrowly evading the swing. In that moment of miscalculation, he thrust the pitchfork forward. Its tines found purchase in the dirt, stopping just short of the looter's foot. It was a warning shot, a clear signal that this farm was not to be trifled with. The hesitation grew within the looters, hesitation that deepened with every heartbeat. They had expected an easy victim, but Farmer Ben was a man of the land, a guy who had faced far worse than this. He wasn't about to let thieves walk over him. Another looter charged, perhaps even more furious, eyes blazing with misdirected anger. They wrestled for control, but Ben remained steady, his feet balanced like roots in the ground. He used every ounce of strength he had left, pushing back against the weight of the aggressor. The struggle felt like a slow dance against the backdrop of chaos, two opposing forces locked in a battle that would determine more than just possessions. With a heaving breath, Ben managed to shove the looter back. The man stumbled, nearly tripping over the pitchfork before regaining his footing. Rage took over as he nearly toppled into his friends, who stared incredulously. They were fighting a battle they didn't understand and had no business starting. Ben bellowed, his voice rising above the turmoil, echoing through the chilly night air. Behind the scene, the sound of barking dogs erupted. His loyal hounds, roused from their slumber, rushed out to defend their territory. Their growls mixed with the chaos, creating a symphony of protective devotion. The dogs charged forward, flank by flank, the looters' bravado cracking under the pressure of this unexpected uprising. The thieves glanced back, realizing their situation was spiraling beyond their control. They were no longer just facing a tired farmer. They were assaulted by an army of determination. Ben's heart soared with pride as his hounds dodged their would-be captors, jaws snapping just inches away from tattered clothes. In a moment of desperation, one of the looters grabbed a nearby metal rod, swinging it wildly in an attempt to clear a path. It missed Ben, but the noise sent shockwaves of panic through the air. The wild thrashing only further galvanized the dogs, who saw in that gesture the evidence of threats to their home. With the quickness of lightning, the men tried to retreat, scrambling back toward their truck, but Ben's resolve stayed stronger. With one swift motion, he bent down to grab another firecracker, lighting it with a flick of his lighter as though it were the most natural of tasks. Booted feet pounded the ground as he hurled it after them. The explosion sent a clear message, shaking the night air again. It was chaos incarnate, but with each loud bang, with each flash of light, Ben turned the tide. The looters stumbled, glancing back in horror as the full realization of their reckless decision began to sink in. He roared, standing his ground as they scrambled into the truck. With engines roaring and gravel flying, they fled into the darkness, leaving behind nothing but uncertainty and a fading echo of their foolish aggression. Hours passed as the moon continued its vigil, keeping a watchful eye over the land. Ben stood still, chest heaving, breaths coming in heavy gulps as adrenaline faded. The dogs circled around, but calm slowly returned. Everything found its way back to balance, the night conceding to peace. He felt pride swell within him, not just for defending his home, but for standing his ground, for making a choice rooted in love and loyalty. The land was more than just a patch of dirt. It was his legacy, hard-earned and weathered by time. As the first light of dawn peeked over the horizon, washing the fields in golden rays, Ben felt the familiar warmth of the sun on his face. There was a bittersweet taste in the air, a reminder of the struggles faced under a watchful sky. His heart was still racing, but beneath it all lay a profound sense of relief. He knew that, while the night had tested him, it had also reminded him who he was: a protector, a farmer, a son of the soil. As he stood surveying his kingdom, he realized that home isn't just where you lay your head, it's the daring spirit of standing tall, even when shadows creep near. And as the day began anew, Farmer Ben took a deep breath, feeling the earth beneath him. Whatever lay ahead, he would be ready. He would fend off the threats, face the dangers, embodying the very strength of the soil that raised him. After all, it wasn't just a farm. It was his dream, his life, and he would defend it with everything he had. The night was thick with darkness, the kind that pressed against the skin and made the world feel heavier. A lone barn stood on the edge of the old Clark farm, its weathered wood bathed in pale moonlight. Inside, the quiet hummed with live animals nestled comfortably in their stalls, the gentle rustling of hay punctuating the stillness. Farmer Jim Clark had been up since dawn, tending to his crops and livestock, pouring himself into the rhythms of earth and labor. But tonight, as he wiped the sweat from his brow and took a moment's respite, a sharp noise pierced the silence. The unmistakable sound of an engine a truck, rumbling down the dirt road leading to his property. Jim's gut twisted as he recognized the need for caution. He'd spent years cultivating this land, and he wouldn't let anyone tarnish it without a fight. The headlights of the truck split the darkness, cutting a jagged line toward his barn. Jim felt his heart race as he peered out from the safe shadows of the barn door. 3 figures emerged from the vehicle, dressed in dark clothing, their faces hidden. They moved with a sense of purpose, a predatory confidence that sent a chill through him. Looters. They believed they could rob his home, and Jim knew right then that he had to protect what was his. The adrenaline surged through him as he quickly made a plan. He would need to rely on his instincts, his experience, and perhaps a little creativity. He'd been a farmer his whole life, but tonight was unlike any harvest he'd ever faced. This was a battle for survival, and he had the advantage of knowing his land inside and out. As the intruders approached the barn, Jim stepped back into the shadows, forming a strategy not just to defend but to surprise them. He crept quietly to where he kept his tools, his heart pounding as he selected a few items: a sturdy pitchfork, a length of rope, and a handful of firecrackers he had saved for celebration. Tonight they would serve a purpose far more serious. The looters reached the barn door, testing the wooden handle. Jim could see their silhouettes, vague in the gloom, growing bolder as they realized his barn was unprotected. They pushed the door open slowly, the creaking of wood sounding like a warning bell in the night. Suddenly, inspiration hit Jim like a bolt of lightning. This was his domain. He knew every crevice and corner, every sound that echoed within. He recalled how he had taught his sheepdogs to respond to his commands and how he felt empowered by their loyalty. What if he could call upon that same instinct to intimidate these men? With a determined glint in his eye, he moved quickly. Using the firecrackers, he set up 2 at strategic points just inside the barn. If they stepped inside, he would set them off, creating a sudden explosion of sound that would take them by surprise. The looters murmured among themselves, their intentions clear. They didn't expect resistance. They didn't know that a storm was brewing, ready to strike. Jim positioned himself behind the barn door, holding his pitchfork tightly, ready to defend his ground. Then it happened. The first looter stepped inside, and with a swift move, Jim struck the ground with his heel, igniting the firecrackers. They exploded with a deafening pop, bright flashes of light illuminating the darkness momentarily like fireworks in July. The looters jumped back, hearts racing, confusion etched on their faces. What the one of them shouted, fear creeping into his voice. Jim seized the moment. He charged out from behind the door, pitchfork raised high. He yelled, his voice booming across the property. The sheer force of his words hung thick in the air, a battle cry transposed upon the night. The looters stumbled backward, terror replacing the bravado they'd walked in with. They hadn't thought a farmer would stand up against them. After all, they didn't see the years of hard work etched into each wrinkle on Jim's face, nor the fierce love he harbored for everything he'd built. Jim continued, his heart racing but his voice steady. This land is my life. The second looter, fueled by panic, clenched a metal rod he'd found on the ground and lunged toward Jim. But Jim was ready. He sidestepped, using the pitchfork to immobilize the rod, trapping it against the barn wall. The looter stumbled forward, and Jim swiftly redirected the pitchfork to jab him in the side, sending him sprawling to the ground. Jim shouted, his heart hammering in his chest. The third looter, realizing the tide had turned, made a break for the exit, eyes wide with fear. As he turned to flee, he tripped over his own feet, stumbling into the muddy ground. Jim took a deep breath to steady himself. He had them on the ropes now. Jim called out, his voice echoing as he whistled sharply. In the next instant, his loyal sheepdogs came sprinting into the barn, barking fiercely, their growls harmonizing with the chaos. They saw the intruders as threats, their instincts kicking in to protect their home. The sight of those wild-eyed canines tore through the looters' fragile courage. Panic surged in the air. They had come for an easy target, and now the tables had turned dramatically. The first looter, still reeling from his confusion, tried for one last desperate chance, lunging towards Jim with shock written over his face. Before he could get close, one of the dogs charged forward, baring its teeth. The man hesitated, fear darting across his expression, and he found himself paralyzed by uncertainty. Jim commanded, and as if the universe agreed, the barn seemed to quake with his thunderous resolve. He was not just protecting a piece of land. He was standing for every drop of sweat he had shed, every seed he had sown, and every dream he had cultivated over the years. Suddenly, the looters decided to escape, scurrying toward the barn door like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Jim's heart raced, his breath catching as they bolted toward the truck, but he would not let them escape without facing the consequence of their actions. He sprang into motion. Jim shouted, chasing them outside, pitchfork held high like a warrior ready to defend his castle. The sight of him rushing out, pitchfork swaying in his hand amidst the darkness, was enough to send them scrambling. The looters clambered into their truck, slamming the doors behind them, ready to flee. Jim reached the edge of the drive just in time to see them fumbling with the ignition. He took one last mighty breath, filled with defiance, and hurled the pitchfork like a spear. It landed inches from the front tire, the metal glinting in the moonlight like a warning. The looters froze, eyes wide. The message was clear, they had pushed too far. One of the looters nervously looked at his companions, uncertainty blooming in the air. "We should go," he said, his voice trembling. They didn't need another nudge. With a roar, the truck peeled out, gravel spraying into the night air as they sped away. Jim stood at the edge of his property, heart pounding but chest swelling with triumph. They hadn't just fled. They had run from the wrong man, the wrong barn, and the unwavering spirit that resided there. As silence returned, Jim leaned against the wooden fence, the adrenaline slowly subsiding. The dogs circled around him, tails wagging with joy. He knelt down, patting their heads, feeling their warmth and loyalty. They had fought together. They had defended the land he loved. With a deep sigh, he looked toward the horizon where the sun would rise soon enough, illuminating the very battle he had faced this night. He was a farmer, yes, but more importantly, he was a protector. The looters had come seeking trouble, but they had left with a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. The night had tested him, but it also reminded him of his strength, his resolve, and the power of a community bound by love for the land. The world outside might be filled with darkness and uncertainty, but in his heart, Jim knew he would always rise to the challenge. He had faced his fears and won, and that victory echoed deeper than any harvest. A bond unbroken by fear and danger, rooted in sheer determination. As the first rays of dawn broke, illuminating his barn and fields, Jim felt something he hadn't anticipated: hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, yes, but he would meet them head-on. After all, he was not just a farmer. He was a guardian of his land, and nothing would ever change that. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, twisted shadows across the fields of Clover Hollow. The air, heavy with the sweet scent of freshly tilled earth, whispered promises of peace and prosperity. But as dusk fell, a growing tension stained the tranquility. An ill wind began to blow through the valley. It was a night that would change everything for farmer Tom Keller. Tom had labored on this land for over 30 years, his hands calloused by hard work and his heart woven into the fabric of the farm. From raising livestock to sowing crops, this land was not just his job, it was his life, his legacy. The barn stood proudly at the edge of the property, filled with tools, memories, and the spirit of seasons gone by. Yet it was about to face an unexpected threat. As he rounded the corner of his barn, wiping the sweat from his brow, Tom's attention was drawn to the sound of tires crunching gravel. His gut twisted. He turned slowly, taking in the sight of a shadowy truck rolling up his driveway. 3 figures emerged, dark silhouettes against the fading light, moving with purpose. They were strangers looters, he realized, and they were here for trouble. Tom's heart raced as adrenaline surged through his veins. What were they planning? Stealing tools? Livestock? His deep-rooted instincts kicked in. This land was all he had, and he would defend it. The truck door opened, and the first looter spilled out, wearing a black hoodie, his face obscured. The others followed, looking equally menacing. They laughed amongst themselves, clearly thinking they had picked an easy target, a quiet farm with a solitary farmer who wouldn't fight back. Little did they know, trouble was about to meet its match. Tom moved quietly back into the barn, his mind racing. He had to act fast. He needed a plan, not just to defend himself, but to surprise them. He swung the barn door shut to shield himself from their line of sight, ears straining to catch any sound. The looters were approaching, rummaging through his tools just outside. He glanced around, his eyes landing on an old rake it had seen better days, but it would do if things got rough. Then he spotted something shiny in the corner, a small stash of fireworks he had saved for the 4th of July. Inspiration sparked like the fuses he held in his hands. With swift hands, he gathered the fireworks, envisioning a plan that could rattle the looters and catch them off guard. If they thought they could just walk in and take what was his, they were in for a surprise. Tom took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. Everything he held dear was at stake. He lit one of the firecrackers, its fuse glowing as it sputtered to life. He emerged cautiously from the shadows of the barn just as the looters were about to step inside. At that moment, he tossed the firecracker toward them. It exploded with a loud pop, a sudden burst of light illuminating the darkened yard. The looters jolted, eyes wide with surprise and confusion. For a split second, they hesitated, and that's when Tom sprang into action. He bellowed, his voice echoing across the fields. They hadn't expected this, a farmer ready to defend his territory. The shock on their faces was beautiful. For the first time, they looked uncertain. Tom was a man of the land, not just some passive victim. He had fought too hard to let this go. He raised the rake high, a symbol of his determination, and charged toward them, his heart steady with resolve. As he turned to face Tom, but that confusion only fueled Tom's energy. He warned, his voice firm yet calm. He positioned himself like a guardian at the threshold, refusing to let them cross any further. Now the odds were starting to shift. Instead of being the prey, Tom had shifted roles. The looters exchanged worried looks, and one of them, trying to regain his confidence, grabbed a nearby shovel, brandishing it like a weapon. He sneered, but his bravado cracked under Tom's fierce gaze. Tom wasn't about to back down. He braced himself and took a step forward, drawing on the courage built from years of hard farming. "This is my home." In response, the looter lunged, swinging the shovel in a desperate attack. Tom, guided by instinct, ducked just in time. The blade of the shovel sliced through air where he had stood moments before. With heart pounding and adrenaline coursing, Tom turned the rake sideways and jabbed it toward the looters, using its length to keep them at bay. He shouted, his voice booming, echoing across the wide-open spaces. The looters were unprepared for a fight. They had expected an easy score, not a farmer intent on holding onto his life's work. There was a moment of silence, filled only with the heavy breaths of the men and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. And then, as if the tension were a taut string about to snap, it broke. The looter with the shovel swung again, but this time Tom was ready. He sidestepped, using the rake to hook the man's leg, sending him tumbling into the dirt. Tom shouted again, his heart hammering with adrenaline. The remaining looters began to realize the weight of their mistake. They had underestimated him, and now their confidence unraveled before his resolve. One of them turned to flee, glancing back over his shoulder where he had thrown the shovel. He yelled, his voice high-pitched with panic, recognizing the futility of their situation. But the third looter, desperate and foolish, charged at Tom. Fueled by reckless anger, he lunged forward, but Tom was faster. He swung the rake with all his might, catching the looter's shoulder and cartwheeling him away, crashing him into the wall of the barn. Tom yelled, his voice thunderous, echoing against the wooden beams of the barn. The fight was over. It was clear that these men hadn't prepared for the wrath of a man who had defended his home, who had weathered storms both literal and metaphorical throughout his life. The moment felt surreal. Each heartbeat echoed within Tom's chest, a reminder that this was not just about defending a barn. It was about standing up for everything he had ever loved. The land, the animals, the family legacy, they weren't mere possessions, they were pieces of his soul. Realizing their defeat, the first looter scrambled to his feet, eyes wild with fear. He pulled his friends, and together they made a frantic dash toward their truck, desperation spurring them on. Tom knew he had to seal the deal to ensure they didn't come back. "Leave," he cried after them, his voice rising over the roar of the truck's engine. As they peeled out of the driveway, gravel spraying in all directions, Tom felt an unfamiliar mixture of relief and adrenaline wash over him. He had triumphed that night. A farmer against thieves. He had defended his home against the odds. As he turned back, heart still racing, he found himself surrounded by the quiet of Clover Hollow once again. The moon hung above, illuminating the farm with a gentle glow. He could already see the first stars winking awake in the vast sky, witnesses to the battle that had just unfolded. The adrenaline began to settle, replaced by a sense of gratitude and pride. His dogs were barking joyously, jumping around him as if celebrating his victory. Tom knelt down, embracing them one by one, feeling their wagging tails against his arms. They had been his loyal companions through thick and thin, and now they had fought alongside him, reminding him that they were a family. As he stood up, brushing the dirt from his pants, he couldn't help but smile. The night had tested him, yes, but it had also reaffirmed his strength and his unwavering spirit. He looked out over the fields, feeling the cool breeze against his skin, and thought about the challenges that lay ahead. Tomorrow, the sun would rise just as it always did, bringing with it a new day and new tasks. He would continue to work the land, nourish the crops, and care for the animals, but he would also be vigilant. Tonight had shown him the darker sides of humanity, but it had also illuminated his own inner strength. Farmer Tom Keller was no mere farmer. He was a protector, a fighter anchored in love and resilience, and nothing would ever change that. As the stars twinkled in the vastness above, he knew he was ready for whatever came next. The farm was his life, and he would defend it fiercely one day at a time. The moon hung low in the sky, bathing the quiet rural landscape in a soft silver glow. But tranquility didn't always echo throughout these fields. On this particular night, the heavy tension in the air hinted at an approaching storm, though not one made of clouds and rain. No, this storm was of a different kind, ready to test Farmer Joe's resolve and spirit. Joe had worked his land for decades, cultivating crops and raising livestock. The weathered barn stood proudly, filled with all the tools of his labor, each faded tool representing years of sweat, heartaches, and small victories. As the night descended, Joe felt something was off. The gentle rustling of leaves held a different tone tonight. The world around him felt charged. Suddenly, the sound of a rumbling engine broke through the calm. He squinted into the darkness, his instincts flaring. A truck, one that didn't seem familiar, crept down his gravel driveway, casting long shadows under its headlights. Curiosity morphed quickly into concern as he approached the barn door, peering out cautiously. The truck stopped abruptly and the doors swung open. 3 young men emerged, their faces obscured by the night, eyes glinting with mischief. They looked around, whispering harshly, eyes scanning for their next target. Joe's heart raced as the realization hit him. They were looters and they had come for trouble. Fear skated across Joe's mind, but soon a surge of anger kicked in. He'd fought too hard, poured too much of his soul into this land to let some punks walk in and take what was his. He felt a fire ignite within him, a deep-seated instinct to protect. The thought that they believed this farm would be an easy mark infuriated him. He had faced fierce storms and relentless droughts. He wasn't going to let these strangers steal his hard work without a fight. In a heartbeat, Joe ducked back inside the barn, his heart thumping like a drum in his chest. The looters stumbled toward his tools, laughing and jostling each other in their arrogance. He quickly scanned the dimly lit space, his mind racing to formulate a plan. Then he spotted his trusty pitchfork leaning against the wall, an extension of his own will, ready to defend what was his. But he needed another edge, something to outsmart them. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a box of firecrackers tucked away near the old hay bales. A flash of inspiration hit him. A quick distraction could buy him the time he needed to turn the tables. Joe grabbed the pitchfork and the firecrackers and moved quietly toward the barn door, careful to make no sound. He could hear the looters laughing outside, their carefree chatter like an ominous taunt. He lit one of the firecrackers, holding it tightly as he stepped into the shadows. Then, with a swift motion, he hurled the firecracker toward the group of looters. It exploded with a loud pop, bursting into light and sound that shattered the calm of the night. The looters jumped back, their laughter turning to shouts of surprise and confusion. One of them yelled, eyes wide with shock. This was the moment Joe had been waiting for. He burst through the barn door, pitchfork in hand, ready to confront the intruders. He shouted, his voice echoing with authority and anger reverberating against the barn walls. The looters stood frozen, their confidence crumbling under the weight of his defiance. The first looter stumbled backward, scrambling for a makeshift weapon from the ground. He found a rusted shovel and brandished it like a sword. He shouted, trying to hold onto his bravado, but his voice trembled slightly. Joe replied, his stance steady, driven by a whirlwind of fury and protective instinct. He had learned long ago that courage is not the absence of fear, but the determination to stand up when it matters most. The second looter dipped back, hesitating as he caught the determined glint in Joe's eyes. There was something powerful about a man defending what he loved, and they were becoming aware of it. Suddenly, the first looter lunged at Joe with the shovel, swinging wildly. But years of farm life had taught Joe to be quick, agile. Even he ducked just in time, then brought the pitchfork down with a swift thrust, catching the looter off guard. He yelled, the pitchfork poised like a knight's lance, unwavering. The looter stumbled, shock etched across his face. The other two exchanged nervous glances, suddenly realizing they had unleashed a fury they weren't prepared for. As if sensing their hesitation, Joe saw an opening. The conviction in his voice stirred something within him, offering him strength he didn't know he had. Moving quickly, Joe shifted his stance and jabbed the pitchfork closer, not to injure but to intimidate. He held his ground like an oasis of courage amidst their confusion. He bellowed, working to deepen the authority in his voice. A small victory flared within him as he saw doubt flicker on their faces, but it wasn't over yet. The second looter, panicking, turned to run. He shouted, retreating toward the old truck that had brought them here. Joe shouted back. He took a step forward, determined that they wouldn't slip away so easily. He wasn't about to give up now. Before he could reach them, though, the third looter surged forward, grabbing the shovel again, but Joe was quicker. He sidestepped, executing a perfect maneuver he'd often practiced while mucking stalls, redirecting the force of their attack. With a swift twist, he caught the looter by surprise, catching him off balance and sending him crashing to the ground. The sound of the thud echoed, as if the universe acknowledged the injustice of their attempted invasion. The remaining looter, alone in the panic, shouted, "Forget it." His voice trembled, breaking their illusion of strength. They had come seeking an easy raid, but now they faced a farmer willing to fight tooth and nail for his land. The first looter clawed his way to his feet, eyes wide with fear. They sprinted toward the truck, scrambling inside before they could even consider their options. As Joe moved again, he raised the pitchfork, feeling lighter with victory. He yelled, the weight of his conviction resonating through his words. The engine roared to life and the tires kicked up gravel as they sped away, disappearing into the veil of night. In an instant, silence washed over the farm. The world seemed to inhale, a deep breath filled with relief. Joe steadied himself, the adrenaline still coursing through him. He took a moment to absorb the reality of what had just happened, the shock, the battle, the defense of everything he held dear. One by one, the barn animals peeked out, their curiosity piqued by the commotion. Joe exhaled deeply, his muscles finally relaxing. He had faced danger and triumphed against the odds. He had become more than just a farmer that night. He had become a protector, a guardian of his own legacy. He stepped into the barn, where the familiar scent of hay offered a comforting embrace. He leaned the pitchfork against the wall, then knelt down, gently running his fingers through the soft fur of his dogs, who had remained loyal by his side throughout. They wagged their tails, their energy proof of their unwavering support. "Good pups," he murmured, his heart swelling with gratitude. They had stood with him, an unbreakable bond forged through love and a shared resolve to protect their home. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, bathing the fields in a golden wash, Joe knew the fight had been one of many. Tomorrow would arrive with its own challenges, a new day filled with hard work and responsibilities, but he would face it with renewed vigor. The looters had come for trouble, but they had left with a surprise that would linger in their memories, a lesson learned about underestimating a farmer's grit. Joe understood that there would always be unforeseen obstacles, but he would never back down from defending what he loved. In the heart of Clover Hollow, with the world awakening around him, Joe stood tall, ready to welcome each new challenge, armed not just with tools, but with unwavering courage and a fierce heart. This land was everything to him, and he would fight tooth and nail to protect it. He was a farmer, a guardian, and nothing would ever change that. A tumultuous wind howled through the fields of Sunny Acres Farm, whipping through the tall grass and rattling the weathered barn doors. In the midst of this restless night, Farmer Mike stood at the edge of his porch, his eyes scanning the wide expanse of land he had nurtured for over 2 decades. As the moon hung low in the sky, bathing the world in silver light, something felt off. There was a tension in the atmosphere, prickling his skin and making the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. Then it came, an engine rumbling in the distance, breaking the stillness and sending a jolt of unease through him. He squinted, trying to make out the shape of the truck rolling down the dirt road toward his property, headlights piercing through the darkness like a beacon of mischief. His heart raced as the vehicle came into view, and the hair on his arms bristled. 3 figures tumbled out, laughing and joking in voices too loud for the quiet countryside. They were young men, dressed in dark clothing, their body language brimming with reckless confidence. In that moment, Farmer Mike realized he wasn't just dealing with trespassers. He was face to face with looters looking for trouble. A surge of adrenaline coursed through him, but with it came a wave of anger. This was his land, his home, built on backbreaking work and dedication. He thought of the countless hours spent under the sun, the joy of watching crops grow, and the bittersweet memories of family dinners made from food he had nurtured himself. He wouldn't allow anyone to destroy that. As the figures approached the barn, their laughter echoed ominously in the air. Mike ducked inside, heart racing, quickly assessing his surroundings. He could hear the looters rifling through his tools, their careless laughter highly inappropriate against the backdrop of his tranquil farm. He needed to plan something clever, something that would give him the upper hand. His eyes darted around the barn, finally landing on an old stash of fireworks he had saved for 4th of July celebrations. An idea ignited in his mind like a spark to kindling. Mike grabbed a handful of firecrackers and hastily stuffed them into his pocket. He picked up a pitchfork from the wall, solid and reliable. If things escalated, he'd need to defend himself. He wasn't going to stand idly by while these intruders thought they could waltz in and take what was his. Slowly, he edged back toward the barn door, peeking through the small crack to gauge their movement. The looters were busy rummaging through his tools, oblivious to the looming danger. It was now or never. He lit a firecracker, the fuse sputtering to life, and with a swift motion tossed it toward them. The crack echoed sharply in the night. It exploded with a vivid flash, surprising the looters into momentary chaos. They recoiled, surprise twisting their faces as panic replaced their revelry. For that brief moment, they were simply kids caught off guard by a sudden cacophony, and it gave Mike the chance he needed. He shouted, stepping boldly into view, pitchfork raised high. His voice boomed like thunder, carrying a primal weight that made the looters take a step back. The surprise on their faces was energizing. They had come expecting an easy score, but instead found a man ready to fight for his home. "This is my place." The first looter recovered quickly, lunging forward with a stolen wrench clutched in his hand. Mike sidestepped, feeling the rush of adrenaline heighten his senses. He thrust the pitchfork forward, the metal glinting in the moonlight, barely missing the intruder but forcing him to stumble back. The looter shot back, though his bravado was wavering. With a quick shift in his stance, Mike decided it was time to make his next move. He felt a mix of fear and exhilaration coursing through him. Years of toiling and solitude on the farm had built a reservoir of strength inside him, and he was drawing from that well now. "You think I'm just a farmer?" The second looter, emboldened by desperation, grabbed a wooden crate and hurled it toward Mike. The splintered wood shattered against the barn wall, but Mike was undeterred. Instead of retreating, he took a firm step forward, causing the looters to reconsider their approach. He yelled, his voice raw and fierce. The third looter, who had been lurking behind the others, suddenly decided he wanted to escape. A look of realization washed over him as he turned away, finding the nearest exit. Panic set in. It was as if the reality of their situation was finally dawning on them. They weren't just dealing with a simple farmer. They were up against a man who had spent a lifetime cultivating his resilience. Mike could feel the tide shifting. The first looter made another rash move, lunging with the wrench. With the pitchfork still held high, Mike sidestepped again, skillfully maneuvering behind the man. In one swift motion, he brought the pitchfork down onto the dirt floor with an authoritative thud. He boomed, almost a growl. His voice echoed inside the barn, filling the air with an undeniable force. The sounds of the looters quickly shifted from aggression to confusion, then to outright terror. Their bravado evaporated as Mike's fierce resolve bore down on them. "You think it's fun to steal from hard-working folks?" One of the looters cursed and tried to grab something from the ground, anything he could use as a weapon, but it was too late. The fear had overtaken them. Mike stepped forward, raising the pitchfork to emphasize his point. The distraction had given Mike unexpected confidence. He was no longer just a defender, he was a force to be reckoned with. The looters exchanged anxious glances, realizing the fight was not just against a man but against everything he stood for: the years of labor, the love for his land, and the courage to protect it. The first looter decided to run for it, bolting toward the barn door with wild eyes. In an attempt to escape, he tripped over a loose board, falling hard onto the floor. Mike stood over him, pitchfork at the ready. Desperate, the remaining two looters took a step back, their minds racing. One yelled, his voice shaky. The other exclaimed, panic flaring. Mike pressed his advantage. "You think you can come here and take what I've worked for?" Their confidence shattered, the looters scrambled back toward their truck, hearts pounding. As they jumped into the vehicle, Mike could see their fear and hesitation, the realization that they had underestimated him painfully clear. One of them shouted as the truck sputtered to life. The tires kicked up a cloud of dust and gravel as they tore away down the dirt road, leaving Mike standing quietly, pitchfork still in hand, adrenaline pumping through his veins. He gazed after them, the rush of triumph and disbelief washing over him. He had defended his home. The echoes of their retreat filled the night, fading into the distance. In that moment of solitude, Mike took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything settle back around him. The barn, his animals, the rich earth. He lowered the pitchfork, allowing silence to blanket the farm once more. As the night deepened, he felt a surge of gratitude for the life he had chosen. It wasn't just about the crops or the livestock. It was about the resilience of hard work, the community around him, and the unwavering spirit that lay at the heart of it all. He thought of the stories passed down, of farmers who had fought for their land and felt an unbreakable bond to them. He might be just one farmer in the vast landscape, but tonight he had shown that he would stand and protect what was his, no matter the cost. The sun began its ascent on the horizon, filling the skies with hues of deep orange and soft pink, dispelling the remnants of darkness. Farmer Mike strolled back into the barn, the morning air cool against his skin. He faced another day of work ahead filled with planting, tending, and nurturing, defending not just crops, but the very spirit of self-reliance and determination. He would always remember the night the looters came for trouble, only to find a farmer prepared to give them a surprise, a fierce heart willing to fight, grounded in love for his land. And in doing so, he reaffirmed his place in the family of farmers, warriors of resilience, tending ground with enduring spirit. Farmer Mike realized that challenges would come, but he would meet them head-on, armed not only with tools but with the blazing fire of determination. This was his life, his legacy, and he wouldn't have it any other way. Under the cover of midnight, the moon hung like a watchful eye over the sprawling fields of Meadow Hill Farm. A light breeze rustled the corn stalks, whispering secrets into the night. But not all was serene in the quiet stillness that enveloped the homestead. As the clock struck 12, fate had other plans. Farmer Sam Parker had just finished a long day of labor. His hands were calloused, his back tired, but as he sipped a cup of steaming coffee, he felt grateful. The sprawling land was his lifeblood, and the farm was filled with everything he held dear: the crops, the animals, and the memories of his family. He knew every inch of this land, every plowed row, every creaky floorboard in the barn. His heart lay buried deep within it. But tonight, as he stepped out onto the porch and looked out over the vast expanse, he sensed something was wrong. He could feel the shadows moving, almost as if they were alive, and his instincts flickered like an old light bulb. A low rumble made its way through the air and engine, one that certainly didn't belong on his quiet farm. Sam's heart clenched. He turned slowly to see headlights approaching. They blinked on and off as they made their way up the gravel path, illuminating the details of the surroundings in spurts. The truck came to a stop, spitting gravel and dust into the air. Sam instinctively stepped back into the shadows, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. 3 figures exited the truck, jackets pulled tight, movement stiff and suspicious. They laughed haphazardly, eyes scanning the ground like vultures hunting for carrion. They were young, reckless, and more importantly, looters. Sam clenched his coffee cup tightly, steeling himself. He had lived through storms, droughts, and blizzards, but this was different. This wasn't just weather, this was a threat. A wave of protectiveness surged through his veins, making him feel alive. He needed to act. Quietly, Sam slipped into the barn, his heart racing. The familiar sense of hay and earth filled his senses, grounding him. He mentally assessed the situation. He needed a plan, something clever, something that would catch these intruders off guard. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he spotted a pitchfork resting against the wall, its wooden handle worn but sturdy. Next to it, he noticed a box of fireworks left over from a past 4th of July. A mischievous grin spread across his face. An idea formed in his mind as bright as the fireworks themselves. With careful hands, he grabbed the pitchfork and a handful of firecrackers, stuffing them into his pockets. It wasn't just good enough to defend. He wanted to surprise them, to show them that a farmer could stand up against the darkness with courage and cunning. Taking a deep breath, he crept to the barn door, peeking through the crack. The looters were now huddled near his tools, laughing and taunting one another, emboldened by the sheer audacity of their situation. One of them exclaimed, lifting a spade high. As the darkness rolled around him, Sam's blood boiled. Enough was enough. With newfound determination, he lit one of the firecrackers. The fuse sputtered, and with a quick flick of his wrist, he tossed it toward the trio. It exploded with a resounding bang, lighting up the night like a lightning strike. The looters jumped back, shock and confusion etched across their faces. One shouted, eyes wide. Sam bellowed, stepping into the light, pitchfork raised high. The laughter evaporated, replaced by the weight of realization. They weren't just here for an easy score. They'd stumbled into a fight they hadn't anticipated. Sam's voice carried authority, echoing off the wooden walls of the barn. He was no longer just a farmer. He was a man ready to defend everything he held dear. The first looter recovered quickly, lunging toward Sam with the spade, but fury drove Sam's movements. He sidestepped deftly, the breath of adrenaline sharp in his lungs. The pitchfork was steady in his hands as he drove it into the ground near the looter's feet. He shouted, grounding his will into those words. The looter squawked, stumbling backward, fear flashing in his eyes. The two others glanced at each other, uncertainty creeping into their bravado. One of them shouted, anger clawing at their confidence. They didn't realize that their bravado was a thin veneer, cracking under the pressure of Sam's fierce spirit. You came here for trouble, but you picked the wrong farm, Sam declared, grounding himself, the pitchfork raised like an ancient weapon. As the looters struggled to regain their composure, panic surged among them. They hadn't expected resistance. They'd come seeking an easy mark, not a battle. Another looter lunged, grabbing a nearby bucket and throwing it at Sam, hoping the chaos would provide the distraction they needed. But Sam dodged with agile reflexes, determined not to let them break his stance. He thrust the pitchfork again, but this time not to harm. He wanted to intimidate. The night air hung heavy with tension, the looters wavering between fear and foolish bravery. At that moment, the third looter broke and bolted toward the barn door, desperation written all over his face. We're not doing this. With a wild yell, he scrambled for the exit. Sam knew he had to act quickly. He shouted, forcing himself into the role of the protector, shifting from instinct to strategy. But as the looter lunged out into the moonlight, Sam was already there, his presence looming large. He thundered, planting the pitchfork firmly into the ground. The remaining looters stood frozen, contemplating their next move. One whispered, panic suffusing their voice. The weight of their choices hung in the air like the tension before a thunderstorm. Before they could gather their thoughts, the sound of barking dogs erupted from the back of the barn, intensifying the chaos. Sam's loyal hounds, roused by the commotion, came racing forward, their fierce growls echoing through the night. The sight of the barking dogs was enough to send the two looters scrambling for the safety of their truck. They stumbled over one another, their bravado shattered, retreating into the vehicle. Go! One of them yelled, heart racing as they fled down the gravel road, tires screeching in a cloud of dust. As silence washed over the yard, Sam stood rooted to the spot, breath heavy with adrenaline. The tension in his body slowly dissipated, replaced by an overwhelming sense of relief and power. It was over. He had defended his land against the odds. But even as he caught his breath, unease loomed in the corners of his mind. They had fled, but what if they came back? What if they regrouped and returned with more? Just then, his dogs approached, tails wagging, eager for praise. You did good, boys, Sam said, kneeling to scratch behind their ears. But even in that moment of victory, shadows danced at the edges of his thoughts. An unsettling feeling crept over him, a foreboding reminder that tonight's battle might not be the last. He stood up and looked toward the now empty road, his pulse still racing. As the cool breeze swept through the fields, it carried with it a whispering echo that reminded him this fight wasn't over. Not yet. And just as Sam began to relax, the rumble of a new engine broke the stillness, growing louder in the distance. Sam's heart sank as he turned to face the sound. The headlights of another truck pierced the night, and a sense of dread settled in his stomach. The truck barreled down the gravel path, intense and unyielding. He could barely make out the figures inside as they approached, but one thing was clear: they weren't looking for peace. They were coming for trouble. Sam muttered, suddenly feeling vulnerable once more. He quickly reached for the pitchfork, gripping it tightly as he prepared to defend himself again. As the truck screeched to a halt and doors flew open, he steeled himself. The energy shifted around him, a storm brewing, the night pregnant with tension. Uncertainty gnawed at his resolve as he faced an approaching line of shadows, a new group gathering, eyes locked onto him with malicious intent. Tonight, the fight had only begun.